Hi guys, in this video we're going to be taking a look at this Vostok Komandirskie, which I got recently cheaply off eBay. As you can see, there's a lot of wear and brassing to the edges of the case. The dial is quite crazed. I won't be able to do anything with the dial, but I'm hoping to kind of get this sorted and cleaned up a little. The bezel is incredibly stiff, indicating that it's gummed up, and it's manual wind, although having wound it, it felt like it gave, and I suspect the spring is broken somewhere. It is still actually, it's going, so it's not, the spring hasn't snapped at the arbor, so if it's snapped anywhere, I'm guessing it's near the barrel wall, which means it's acting a bit like a slipping spring, but obviously with very little power, so I suspect it will need the main spring replacing, and I'm hoping that it's not damaged any of the internal wheels. So what we're going to do is go ahead and get this apart and take a look inside, and we'll see what we find in there. So that's the case back removed, and on initial inspection it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look bad at all. It's got quite a healthy beat to it, so hopefully a good clean and probably a replacement mainspring should get this beating quite nicely and fairly accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and uncase the movement, and then I will pop off the bezel and the crystal so that I can give the case and everything a good clean, because it's quite grubby. As you can see here, that's the watch out of the case. It's hard to see at the moment, but I can see a lot of crud around the bezel there, and there's all of the movement ring and the various case back and pieces in there, and this gives you a better idea of the dial and hands. You can see how crazed it is. It's actually faded up at the top. It's kind of nice in its own way, regarding a little bit of patina showing its age, but the hands could use a bit of a polish up and possibly a re-loom. So what I'm going to do just here is we're going to get the dial protector and pop off the hands. I'm going to go ahead and remove the dial with the 2 dial screws here, which is just going to leave us with the movement. Here is the case, the bezel, and the bezel spring and the associated bits, and it is, as you can see, it's quite disgusting. That's years and years of grub and nastiness. So that's going to have a good bath and get thoroughly cleaned out, and as is the crystal, and I will give the crystal a bit of a polish, which is in not bad condition, all things considered. It's got a couple of strange, almost circular marks on it, which is a little unusual, but it's not in bad condition. And the tension ring is still intact in there, although it did pop out quite easily. But so I'm going to give that all a clean up, and then we can put the case back together. The sort of wear and brassing at the edges, I'm just going to kind of give that a little bit of a polish and make that a bit of a feature, I guess. Same with the edging of the bezel and what have you, as you can see down here, because doing otherwise would mean replating. It's just not worth it, and I'll see if we can do something with these dots as well, but we'll see how that goes. The case back and the securing ring and the gasket are all reasonably okay. I do like that these use big wide flat gaskets, and they tend to be a bit better, a bit longer lasting than your typical round O-ring types. So that's the disgusting bits. So while I'm printing up a movement holder, I'm going to go and clean those. So we begin the movement strip, starting on the dial side by removing the date wheel retaining cover plate, which is secured by 3 small countersunk screws. Here I'm holding the plate at the lower portion where the date wheel jumper spring is, to make sure that doesn't ping away, and then the spring and jumper are lifted away, followed by the date ring. The date ring, as you can see here, is not in the best condition, but it is legible and usable and will receive a gentle clean up. Next up is the dial washer or foil and the hour wheel, followed by the intermediate date setting wheel and the date setting wheel assembly, which is held in place by a single shouldered screw. The date setting wheel assembly is comprised of two components. Next to be removed is the Keyless Works cover plate, which is secured by 3 screws. And here I'm just disengaging the spring that bears onto the setting lever before lifting that away. Followed by the minute wheel, the intermediate wheel, and then the yoke spring. We then remove the yoke and the setting lever. Followed by the winding stem and winding pinion and clutch wheel. And last of all, the cannon pinion. We then move on to the top side of the movement, removing the balance cock. First of all, here I have to use a piece of Rodico as the screws are quite deep set in the plates, and we then go onto the train bridge, removing the 3rd, 4th and escape wheels. Followed by the pallet cock and pallet fork. All of the components are visually inspected on removal for damage, specifically because of the slipping of the mainspring. Thankfully, all of them appear to be intact and in good condition. At this point here, I'm placing the pallet fork onto a piece of Rodico to remove a hair which was stuck quite solidly onto the entry pallet stone of the pallet fork. And here I try to show that in close-up. It's hard to see, but in terms of watch internals, this is quite a large piece of detritus that will cause problems with the running of the watch. We then move on to removal of the center seconds pinion, removing the small brass sprung arm which holds that in place. And withdrawing the pinion itself, which is a very tiny part, as you can see in this close-up. That particular part is cleaned by hand, as being so thin it would be very likely that it would slip through the mesh of the cleaning basket, and there's a possibility of damage. We then move on to removal of the crown wheel and ratchet wheel. The crown wheel being made up of two components plus the left hand thread screw that holds it in place, as you can see here. And then the click and click spring are removed. Followed by the barrel bridge, which holds the barrel and center wheel in place. Again, having to use Rodico to remove the screws, because these plates are actually surprisingly thick and the screws very deep set inside them. Here the balance cock is refitted in readiness for putting through the cleaning machine. And the one final component that I almost forgot to remove is the setting lever release pin for releasing the stem, which simply lifts out. Here you can see the problem that we have with the mainspring in the barrel, and you can see that there's a large gap on one side, and what had happened here is at some point in the past the watch had been wound very tightly, which had actually bent the spring where the locking portion of the spring, which was a separate tag affixed to the end. Sometimes it's a folded over piece. You can see it in close up here. This tag, which was affixed to the end of the spring, which locates into the slot and locks it in place, had actually been bent by severely winding the movement too hard in the past at some point, and it's gradually been bending and bending, and it had eventually given way. Here are the case parts after a good clean, and there's no wonder that the bezel wouldn't turn. It wouldn't turn at all when I first got it, and it barely turned when I demonstrated it in the video just prior to stripping it. And there's no wonder, because it was caked. It's a while since I've seen a watch that's so gunked up, and it was really nasty. And I had to leave it to soak in hot soapy water just to soften everything enough so that I could scrape the worst of it off, and using cocktail 6 toothpicks and hot water and a toothbrush, which I use specifically for case and bracelet cleaning, I got it into some kind of presentable state. So here first of all is the ring that secures the movement to the back, and next up is the case back itself, which has this inscription on. For those of you out there who know Russian and maybe know what that is or says, I'll bring that up a little bit closer for you actually. But that's come up quite nicely. I shall give that a bit of a polish, and along with the case and the other bits. We've got the gasket, the rubber gasket, which is in surprisingly good condition. It's a little compressed, but it will do. It will serve its purpose. Here we've got the case itself. Apart from the obvious signs of heavy wear on the plating that you can see there around the edges, it's come up quite nicely, and the front of it is actually surprisingly good, and that will get a polish as well, including the edges where they're worn away. I can't do anything about the plating, and I think, you know, it all adds to the general wear and tear of the watch, commensurate with its age and being an everyday hack, everyday sort of wear and what have you. There's the bezel spring, which is cleaned up a little, and the bezel itself, which looks considerably better, so many times cleaner, believe me, than the gunk that was inside there. And no clicks on these. The Vostoks, they're just free turning. They is that a bit of gunk that I missed, or is it? Yeah, I think that's a bit that I missed down in the lugs there. I'll have to go back and get that. Yeah, these are free turning, the bezels. Again, I'm going to give this a bit of a polish, and again, it's got the sort of wear on the edge where it's obviously been gripped and turned and what have you over the years, which, yeah, it's kind of nice again. And then lastly is the crystal. It's clear enough, you can see through it no problem, but the surface will look 100 times better once I've gotten some very fine sandpaper on that, flattered it and then polished it. It will be almost like new. So we'll get the crystal nice and clear and clean. I've got to go back and just get that bit of gunk that I've missed in the lugs down here, which I've only just noticed. And then for the bezel itself, I think what I'm going to do is get some enamel paint, some red enamel paint, to redo the dots up here that have come away. The majority of the black paint is still in there, surprisingly, so you know that's obviously made of sturdier stuff. And a few little dots of red in there, and leave that to set, and that should look quite good, I think. There we are for part one. That's the overview of the watch, uncasing, cleaning up the case components which have been separated into component parts and will be reassembled once I've finished up with the crystal cleaning and the bits and pieces. The watch movement has been disassembled and it's generally quite clean. It's not bad internally, although there was quite a large, in watch movement terms, a large hair, white hair inside the pallet fork, which certainly wouldn't have been helping things. And the spring, as you saw there, was damaged. I'm going to see what's happening with regards to the balance once I reassemble as well, because it has a shim in it. Yet when I fitted the balance for cleaning, when I refitted the balance to the movement to go through the cleaning machine, what I noticed is there did seem to be an adequate amount of end play. So I'm not entirely sure why the necessity for the shim, but I shall see once I reassemble it and see what happens with the amplitude, and if necessary refit the shim. So we'll leave it at that for now, and we'll see you in part two for the reassembly.